All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Mind Body Mushroom, the number 47 ranked podcast in health and alternative wellness in Italy. And I believe any day now will be number 46. And if you've been following the show for any length of time, you know that we're really after is the full picture of what it means to be human. The scars, the pain, as well as the tools, both ancient and modern, that people have used to find their way back to themselves. We've talked about plant medicine, about the nervous system, about what happens when the mind is forced to process experiences that exist outside the range of ordinary life. Today's guest has lived way outside the range of ordinary life. Alex West spent 20 years as a United States Navy SEAL. He completed 15 combat deployments, was part of both the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, and spent over a decade at DEVGRU, one of the most elite and secretive special operation units in the world. You would never know it due to how humble and unassuming he is on the outside, but he's seen and done things that most people will only ever encounter in theaters, including the high-stakes mission to eliminate Osama bin Laden. And he carried all of it home, the good, the bad, and the ugly. After a second helicopter crash in combat, he found himself at a traumatic brain injury clinic at Bethesda Naval Hospital, staring down the real cost of what it means to serve in a high-speed unit. PTSD, TBIs, and a mind and body that had been pushed past every conceivable limit. But rather than accept that the only tools available were the ones handed to him by the system that built him, he went searching. He explored integrated healing, the kind that draws from both cutting-edge science and ancient tradition, modalities that work not just on the thinking mind, but on the body that stores the trauma and the spirit that has to find a reason to keep going. The full spectrum, from clinical therapies that rewire how the brain holds memory, to plant medicine, to the practices that cultures thousands of years older than our own have used to bring warriors home from war. Out of that search came One More Wave, a San Diego-based nonprofit that uses surfing, custom adaptive equipment, art, and community to bring veterans back from the edge. Not just the physical edge, but the psychological and spiritual ones as well. This is a conversation about war, about healing, and about what the ocean can do that medicine alone cannot, and about what it looks like to rebuild yourself from the inside out. Alex, welcome to the Mind Body Mushroom.
Thank you for having me, Jordan. I really appreciate you taking the time and the opportunity.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you being here. So quick note before we get started, just got to pay the bills real quick. This episode is brought to you by Wind & Coffee, small batch whole bean coffee infused by hand with a 14 mushroom blend featuring lion's mane, chaga, cordyceps, and reishi, made with only the most premium bioavailable organic ingredients from both fruiting body and mycelium on the market. 100% organic, grown right here in America and processed right down the road in San Diego, California. If you're into what we're talking about on the show, you already know the power of fungi, and Wind & Sea is bringing that same philosophy to your morning cup. So check it out at windandseacoffee.com, WINDANSEA coffee.com. I'll put links at the end. But sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you for being here, bro. Yeah, so let's kind of talk a little bit about your origins and your time on the teams. So what was the pull for you towards the SEAL teams? Was it something that you could have articulated at the time? Or is it really kind of only in hindsight that you understand why you needed that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, my father was a veteran. He was in Vietnam, and not that he wanted me to join the military, but I always looked up to him and his service. So I feel like that was like the first little seed that got planted. And then when I was, I don't know, 10 or 11 years old, this like earth-shattering movie called Navy SEALs with Charlie Sheen came out. And I was just like, oh, I want to be like that, which is ridiculous. However, it's the truth. I have to just like come out and just be honest. So I was influenced a little bit by that. And then I had a first cousin who, his name's Pete Scobell. We're more like brothers. When I was a junior in high school, I went to his BUDS graduation. So it was SEAL training graduation. And which was really ironic because a lot of the guys that I met when I was a junior in high school, I would end up serving with later on down the road and have become friends with them since. I think that impact of Charlie Sheen, my dad, of course, his background in the military, and then being an impressionable young guy and just seeing like the bond that these guys had and just how close they were. And then this was all pre 9/11 too. And, kind of talking about a job that was, kind of exciting, from, jumping out of airplanes, blowing stuff up, traveling the world, the tight knit community. I think that is what drew me to wanting to join the military and become a SEAL.
Right. Now, did you go straight into BUDS, like from the outside, or, you class up and kind of went through teams, or did you do any time with the fleet?
No, yeah. So I went after boot camp. In those days, at least, it was encouraged that you got a job or a rate, for some of the listeners that might come from the Army, like an MOS, whatever it is, like a job. And my job in the Navy I got trained in was a radioman. So shipboard communications, SATCOM radios, high frequency radios, anything that communicating on a ship. So I went through that school, which would end up becoming IT later on in the Navy. But anyway, I was trained as a radioman and then went right to BUDS. I was young, 18 years old when I checked into BUDS.
Wow. Yeah. So, and this, you said you joined right before 9/11. So this was like,
I did.
It was still pre 9/11.
Yeah, I joined in 98 actually. And then I checked into BUDS in 99, February of 99.
So you were just kind of finishing up like your full, getting your bird, and then then 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was on my first deployment
Shit.
We had just deployed. Yeah, we had just deployed, and we had this really cool deployment planned, pre-9/11, of course.
Yeah.
And it was we were going to go to Hawaii, Australia, Thailand, and all these join the Navy, see the world type things. And then we were going to go out to Bahrain, and at the time where I was at SEAL Team 3, we were going to do shipboard takedowns of, at the time, Saddam Hussein was smuggling oil because there was an embargo on Iraq at the time. And so we were going to go after these smugglers. It wasn't anything like too crazy cool, but it was, for the time, that was the place to be, for sure.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. That was kind of the next question I was going to ask was, how the mission set that you guys were kind of working up towards, pre 9/11. So it sounds like it was maybe kind of like VBSS or GoPlat takedowns. Like, that's very Charlie.
A lot of that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I was channeling my inner Charlie Sheen.
Dude,
I was really had
Australia.
With flight suits on. Yeah, it was all sorts of cool stuff.
Yeah.
We had MP5s. It was like,
come on, dude. Come on,
dude. Yeah. Great for photo ops.
Yeah, exactly. That's fun. So, and then 9/11 happens, and how does your mission set sort of change from that point? Because this is still, Afghanistan, like very, very early.
Yeah, we were in Darwin, Australia when September 11th happened, and I remember we had been training all week, and finally we had some to go out on the town, and we were at a restaurant. I remember sitting down. We finally were able to just relax and have a night on the town, and we just got this word like everybody's getting recalled back to the ships. All the Marines. I was a part of an ARG, so a bunch of Marines, a bunch of Navy sailors. There's like 3 ships there, so we all begrudgingly were like getting back to the ship. And then that's when in the galley we saw the September 11th happening, the planes hitting the towers, and from there, we actually started steaming right for the Pakistan coast. However, we did have a stop off in East Timor to do a humanitarian mission. At the time, there was a civil war going on there. It wasn't anything like too high speed or cool, but essentially delivering medical supplies and food and water and things like that. But we only did that for a couple of days and then rolled right off the coast of Pakistan. And then our leadership was smart enough to get us involved. Essentially, we got deployed to Jacobabad, Pakistan, to support CSAR operations. Or for anybody who doesn't know, it's like if a pilot gets shot down, the helicopters that go in to get them out. And so we were able to get in Pakistan, I would say, this was a long time ago, late October of 2001, supporting the beginning of the ODAs, or the SF teams that were pushing down with the Northern Alliance. So that was the beginning of it. I can talk more about it, but that's like at least like where we were at within that first, I guess, month after September.
Wow. So you were like on target pretty early on in the thing. That's amazing.
We were able to do even, we did some of those CSAR, like going in and help, but also we were doing mechanized reconnaissance in Humvees right below the city of Kandahar as it was falling. I would love to be able to come in and say like, and then there's this like super cool story for this or that. It was a little bit, it wasn't that exciting, kind of anticlimactic. However, it was so cool, especially when we reflect back on that time in the country and just some like wanting to get some payback. It was just cool to be a small spoke on the wheel of progress of that invasion.
Yeah, no, it's, this is kind of an aside, but it's an interesting point that you make that just seeing the general American attitude towards, the conflict, right? 9/11 happens and everyone's like, sign me up, send me to war. Let's go get these dudes that did this, and comparing that to the general sentiment right now of, what's happening in Iran. And, that's something that I've been kind of covering a lot, not necessarily on the podcast itself, but more so I started a TikTok channel not too long ago, bro. It's been blowing up, but that has been a big piece of my focus has been just sort of like exploring, the war in Iran. And speaking of CSAR, that was probably the biggest mission that happened, in this whole operation has been, those pilots that went down and the kind of the search and it feels very different. We're also not, I was watching, remember that show, The Osbournes?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I think that show came out like 2003 or something like that. But this is, MTV, VH1. This was like prime time, early aughts, Americana, USA type shit. Mm-hmm. And it's just interesting to have seen what 25 years of war and the money and the psychological cost and the physical toll that it took on every single American, and then where we are now, and it just feels like sometimes we're like a husk of our former selves, and and yet we're kind of getting thrust into this conflict by people who I think mind sort of pickled in the 80s, and haven't quite caught up to the realities that people like yourself, been in the shit, kind of like it's different. At least it seems like it is,
Yeah. Oh, it definitely feels different. And, I'm out, of course. I retired in 2018. So I don't want to speak directly about the guys who are doing those operations or currently, operating. However, I can still sense it, the difference of, the fervor of the country to after the September 11th. If we talk all the way back to 2001, what a difference it is till now. And then even what a difference it was until 2010, I remember 2013 being deployed to Afghanistan and thinking to myself, like, man, what are we doing? Like we've been here for so long, and not to go too far into it, but it was a very different thing where it's almost like, because I find if you're asking yourself, like, what are we doing, especially in war, and especially if you're noticing the population isn't really on board and doesn't trust you, it's kind of hard to get motivated also. Even as a professional soldier or, operator, whatever, it's still kind of like, I don't know, we still have brains. We're still picking up on stuff and not making calls that, the big policy calls are made by people who have never served often or who have never even been on the ground. So it's interesting how we found ourselves in that predicament as a country.
Right. And especially, I mean, like, from first experience, like how much going through buds or any of this type of training, like it's so much of it is like your will to do it. It's this internal, self-talk that like, I want to be here. I'm choosing to show up every single day. And so, it's, I can imagine that being a really hard component to be like, now the kind of self-doubt, like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, what's going on? And, doing your job. So, just to kind of wrapping up on some of this stuff, I want to get to kind of transition into DEVGRU. Sure. But so you were kind of doing more, at the time, what SEAL team were you on, by the way?
SEAL Team 3. Based out of San Diego.
Okay, you were out of San Diego. Cool. So were you guys doing like, kind of direct action stuff, like going after HVTs in, getting some intel, popping around, looking for bin Laden, and then over time what are just a couple other like little mission sets that
Sure.
you've done, and then let's talk about your transition to DEVGRU.
Yeah, sure. So let's see here. So as I mentioned, we were doing the invasion supporting with mechanized reconnaissance, and then we found ourselves actually at Kandahar, and then it was kind of quiet. We were doing some small stuff like demo shots, nothing too crazy at the time. Though the military was so different, also as far as like collecting intelligence and targeting all these things that we would get very proficient at later on down the road. So it was kind of like, here we
Mm-hmm.
are, boom. The military's here. How do we find targets? Like, we don't
Right.
have an infrastructure of human intelligence, signals
Mm-hmm.
intelligence, anything like that. So it was a little anticlimactic, at least when I was there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we redeployed home, and some of the other teams, the guys that replaced us, it got a little bit more direct action
Mm-hmm.
type thing.
Mm-hmm.
I came back, and at the time, the SEAL teams had restructured a lot. And my next workup because of that was super quick. So it was only about 6 months. And then we redeployed. It's usually, for the listeners that might not know, an 18-month workup in a SEAL team before you deploy. But in that era, because of the restructuring, we got back. It was a quick workup of roughly 6 months and deployed to Guam. And then while we were deployed to Guam, the Iraq War, we got redeployed to Kuwait to do the invasion of Iraq. And so, which we did with the Al Faw Peninsula, which was this southern point of Iraq in Basra, outside of Basra. And there's these big oil fields and oil terminals, and SEAL Team 3 as a whole consolidated. And the only time that I know of that a SEAL team, by the whole team,
Yeah.
did one large operation. I
Wow.
might be mistaken that it's not the only one, but as far as I can think of in the moment, that's the
Yeah.
only time I've heard of it. And then we did that operation, which was kind of sporty. And then I remember coming back, and I'd already screened for DEVGRU and gotten picked up, myself and a handful of other guys. And the Master Chief was like, all right, guys, we're going to be driving with the Marines all the way up into Baghdad. So you're either going to hop in with us right now, or you're going to hop on, grab your orders, and fly back to go to Virginia Beach for selection.
Wow.
What is it that you want to do? And I remember thinking, like, I don't know, man. Like, that sounds
Yeah.
pretty exciting. Hop with the Marines and go to
Right.
Baghdad. Because
Right.
we
Right.
didn't also know what would transpire with these wars. And it was like, is this going to be done? Because at the time, even Afghanistan was not that exciting. And Iraq was the hot ticket at the moment. And however, I remember my Master Chief also saying, like, hey, man, if I were you, these wars aren't going anywhere. He just had the wasta, or the experience, to know that,
Yeah.
like, hey, these wars aren't going anywhere. And if I were you, you're going to want to be in a JSOC assault squadron. That's just my opinions, but you can do whatever you want. And so I ended up with the rest of the guys. We decided, okay, we're going to go to selection. And so that's kind of where that ended for me, that
That's
deployment.
interesting. What the remaining Team 3 guys, was that kind of like Task Force, Bruiser, and some of like Jocko, and or no,
No,
different
no,
time?
that was a different time. Those
Gotcha.
guys, that task force, I want to say that was 2006, I believe. I might be off by a little bit here or there, but roughly that's Task Force Bruiser was in that era.
Yeah.
And this was like 2003.
3.
Um,
Gotcha.
March, I believe, is when the invasion happened, something like that.
Rad. Rad. Okay. So yeah, you go home, screen, get selected, and then were there any kind of interesting, or what was sort of your perception of the DEVGRU training and selection?
Yeah,
As much detail or as little as you want, but just in
sure.
general, like your experience, how did it kind of compare to what you were used to, and what maybe something you struggled with, something you were like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm into this, or
Well, yeah, the first time I knew, I mean, I'd read the book Rogue Warrior by Dick Marcinko, the founder of DEVGRU, and that's the first time I'd heard of it. This was before I joined the military. And then, and being a West Coast team, there wasn't too many guys from DEVGRU. A lot of guys
Mhm.
would hang out, perhaps marry a local girl in Virginia Beach or whatever. So a lot of guys are kind of out that way. And then, but my first platoon chief came straight from DEVGRU and right from Red Squadron. His name is Todd Sharbutt, and was like one of my biggest mentors I've even to this day have had. And I just remember he was just better at everybody and everything. He was like tactically better shooter, better like everything. And I remember thinking, like, what is going on? There's something very
Yeah.
different, and picking his brain, and him just being like, everybody's like that. Like, it's actually, if you want to go, like, if you really want to maximize your potential, then you're going to go to a unit like that. And then, fortunately, I'd screened with him. He kind of got me I don't know, they were looking to try out younger guys to go through selection at the time, because historically, usually you're about 28 or older when you went to Dev Group selection. However, I was, when I screened, 22. And I remember them asking me, like telling me actually, like, hey, if you're lucky enough that we pick you up, we're going to try this out with you to see if, maybe we can get a younger guy in here if this works. And then that way we're maximizing your time at the command at Dev
Yeah.
Group, learning our, tactics, learning the way that we do business, so that one day when you are, let's say, an assault team leader, you've been there for a long time and you can maximize your true potential with the way that we want it done. And so I was like, okay, no pressure. Geez, all right,
Yeah.
I'll give it a shot. And fortunately, they took a chance on me. And then I went out in 2003 for selection, which is it's pretty brutal. It's about 9 months. And, it's just a very different than a BUDS type selection. BUDS, for the people who don't know, it's like the SEAL kind of crucible. You have to go through that. It's super tough. A lot of guys don't make it. I thought it was tough, at least. And then high attrition rate. However, in order to go to Dev Group, you usually have to do at least 5 years, depending on the guy. I mean, I didn't, but usually at least 5 years. And in the SEAL teams, then you apply. And then if you go through a kind of a basic selection, or like a pre-screening, pardon me, and then from psychological testing to a workout to all different things, and then they take your reputation to Dev Group and be like, does anybody have any issues with this guy? Kind of like, in a way, kind of old school, good old boy network, sort of.
Yeah.
So
Right.
where there could be like thumbs down. And one day when I became one of those instructors, I was interested in seeing it from that end too,
Yeah.
because it's not just like thumbs down, I don't like this guy because my girlfriend thinks he's good looking, right? It's more of like they're looking for, like, is this guy a team player? What's up with this reputation? So anyway, if you get the chance and you go there, and historically, it's about a 50% attrition rate to make it through that, about a 9-month selection. And it's horrible, it sucks, but it's more on performance. So, because they already know you're not going to quit physically. So it's more of like, all right, if you miss a shot in the house, you're going to get written up. And if you miss two, you might get written up again, or you're asked to leave. And so, like, it's just like very high performing thing, because you're a national mission hostage rescue unit, and you're going after not only hostages around the world, for American hostages, but you're also going after the highest level targeting. So it's like you don't miss shots. You don't miss, fall off a caving ladder. It's just like it's a no fail mission, no shit. And so that's exactly who I wanted to be around, and exactly who I wanted to get mentored by, and exactly the funding and training, and I could go on. But like I said, I wanted to be truly at the tip of the spear, and that's what that place for me, at least in the Navy side, that's what it was.
Wow. And did you kind of feel like you like rose to the occasion, or because sometimes these like ultra high performers, you're like, some people are just kind of born that way. It's, you know what I mean? Like
Sure.
shit just comes easy to them, and that's kind of, yeah, of course it's hard and whatever. Was it like everything? Like I talked to Dan Corbett, the and he
Yeah.
kind of is one of
Teammates.
these dudes that's like everything kind of seems like it kind of comes easy to him, like
Yeah.
and was that kind of your experience, or did you kind of feel like you were getting your dick smashed every day?
Yeah, I would just, the latter. Like, I'm not saying it was, because I mean, I was young. So like, even when I reflect back on it, my prefrontal cortex, like the front part of your brain that is in charge of executive decision making, has not even been fully developed. So I wasn't even cognitively at my full potential of my brain, right? For something that takes a lot of prefrontal cortex, decision
Yeah,
making, right? Like
right.
whether you take a shot, don't take a shot, whether you do a certain technique within a kill
Mm.
house, all of these things. And so I'm not saying that I was like the worst, but I wouldn't say that I was like some sort of like natural. I would just say, but I will say this, that most guys, what they screen for there is that you're trainable. And what I mean by that is, like, you set your ego aside, you just do what they tell you to do, even if you're not sure why, but you will find out at some point. And that's why I believe that unit, in our Army counterpart, is very, like, very elite, because what
Mm-hmm.
we would often do is bring in, like, for shooting instruction, you have the funds to bring in the world champion, like, IPSC shooters, right? So you're getting it from the guy, right? Or like for skydiving, you would get like Team Red Bull would be your personal instructors, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, so the thing is though, it's like they're not screening for Team Red Bull for you to be that. They're screening for, we're going to bring in the best people in the world, and you need to be trainable and
Yeah.
take what you can from them.
Right.
So to your question, a long answer to your simple question, I would say that I was like probably average. I had my moments of not being average. I had my moments of kind of rising to the occasion when I was going through selection. But I
Mm-hmm.
will say that I was trainable. And I will say this too, I was also young and intimidated. At the time, I was the youngest guy ever to go through the selection. Guys after me have also been 23. But at the time, that was not the case. And so I was getting a lot of like, it wasn't like guys were being unprofessional, but certainly people knew. And they let
Yeah.
me know that I was lucky to be there at that age. And so there was some of that too, of just being intimidated if I'm just being transparent, like especially that young in my career, and not having the background of the other classmates too. A lot of the other classmates have been in the SEAL teams twice as long as I had, if not longer. So I wouldn't say I was some sort of like natural. I would just say that I met the mark.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. And so now you're what squadron did you go to? Red?
Red,
Gold?
Red
Yeah,
Squadron.
red. Okay, so you're there now. It's 2006. 2000, what year did you say this
It
was?
would have been like
2006.
2003.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
okay.
Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and now you're with JSOC. So how did your mission set kind of change in that time period? From what you're doing before,
Sure.
now you're kind of deploying 2004-ish.
Yeah.
Where are you going? What are you doing?
Sure. Yeah. I will say the one thing that was, before I get into that, that was fascinating to me was like in that place that the guys were so talented and just like I went like a cut, truly a cut above. And
Yeah.
so even doing like your first house runs, guys are hauling ass, and
Yeah.
they're not just hauling ass, but they're hauling ass, and their shots are so accurate. And all of this, and it's just like, oh my gosh, okay, let me just try to keep up. And I remember even I had a mentor, Lou Langlis, who passed away in extortion, him saying like, "Hey man, I get it. Like you've been through selection, but take the trash out.
Yeah.
That's your job."
Yeah.
And then him
Yeah.
being even like, and by the way, like he's a mentor, and I love him. This was like endearing in a sense. But he was like, in a house run debrief, he'd be like, "For your first year, you're not even allowed to talk. So if you think you have anything important to say, first run it by me because I don't want you embarrassing me or the team. Okay?" And I'd be like, "Okay, I'll just shut up and take the trash out." And so, and at that time, I'd already had, 2 combat deployments in the White Side SEAL teams, and I'd been through selection, and I was like, okay, I'll just do whatever, being trainable, I'll do whatever you tell me to, even if it is take the trash out and shut the fuck up. But from there, so my first deployment at Red Squadron was in Shkin, Afghanistan, which was an outpost right on the border, out in the middle of nowhere, where we were working with the agency running an Omega team, which essentially was a paramilitary force, and that was very interesting to be honest. Even as I reflect back on it, I mean that was a different era in the world and the war. Pardon me. It was a mission set that I was not, training indigenous forces and leading them in combat. That was all new to me, and so, but it was exciting.
Bro, that's fascinating. Yeah, you're the first person I've talked to that has interacted with that Omega team thing. I think for maybe people listening, you know the Omega team that was most recently in the news during the National Guard shooting in DC that happened. And yeah, so that the person was an Afghan national that had worked with the CIA, and they'd kind of, after we left Afghanistan, they'd come over here, and But anyway, point being is like,
Yeah.
yeah. So those Omega team guys were highly screened. A lot of background stuff, and vetted by the agency, but they were these kind of like
Oh yeah.
kill squad dudes.
Yeah.
That's wild. What was it
Yeah.
like kind of working with them? Was it kind of like you weren't quite trusting them a little bit, or did it feel, was it kind of like MK Ultra y? Like, where did these guys
Yeah.
come from or some shit?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that's a good question because I did a few tours with the Omega,
Yeah.
and it was different depending on the era, right?
Yeah.
So if you're talking circa 2001 to 2005, might be different than, let's
Sure.
say, 5 to 10, and on and on.
Oh, it's
But
been a
like,
while. You guys worked with them
oh
for a
yeah,
while then. Wow. Yeah, I
oh
didn't know
yeah,
that.
yeah, we
Yeah.
did, and And the why was that those units, they could not call in airstrikes and they couldn't call in
Mm.
medevacs, and so they
Mm-hmm,
needed
mm-hmm.
military,
Yeah.
DoD guys, and so they chopped over JSOC assaulters, which at the time, I mean, it started with DEVGRU guys and would go on to other units as well. That's the why. One of the main reasons why was
Mm-hmm.
that we were force multipliers, and also by us being with them, sharing intelligence, target networks, that type of thing. But to answer your question, yeah, I mean, I would say like vetted. Yeah, they did the best they could. At the end of the day, they were. It's kind of hard because it's a different era too. Talking about vetting someone in 2004, there's not really like biometrics that you can, there's not. It's more of like we're going to do the best we can. But I will say that we did not have what they call green on blue type. Basically, the Afghans towards like 2012, 13 and on, they started, the guys that we were leading, they were turning their guns on the American advisor.
Mm-hmm.
And a lots of times it wasn't in like some cool like operation where you die, like, taking down some compound. It was like an ODA guy or some soft guy, like helping a guy on a flat range, dial in his AK, and then somebody,
Wow.
sneaks behind him and unfortunately, takes a
Wow.
shot. So like it got
Wow.
really weird. And that tension
Yeah.
between the Afghans, not just in the Omega, but in a lot of the soft units that were training the Afghans, like the commandos, they really struggled with that type of basically getting murdered by the Afghans. And then, of course, that led to distrust. And then, of course, that led to animosity. And then it just kind of caused issues.
We're good. You cut out for a second, but I caught you. Wow, that's you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Sorry.
It's all good.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So were pretty much all of your deployments, were you just kind of hitting like Iraq,
Yeah.
Afghanistan, back and forth, or were you kind of rotating around the Balkan
Yeah.
shit?
Well, I was deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan or East Africa in
Mm-hmm.
support of, counterterrorism operations every year from '01 to 2013, at least one time a year. So like, yeah, we would joke that, we lived in Iraq and Afghanistan and
Yeah.
vacationed in the States. So
Yeah.
like, yeah, it got wild. I mean, to be honest, like I remember 2011, I was in a gunfight in 3 different countries. And so it's just like,
Wow.
those units are crazy. You're just that's the problem with having such high performing units, is that you get really overworked. You
Yeah.
become the kind of catch all, like, oh well, this has to get done. Send it over to the dev group or CAG, to get it done. And the thing is, there's only so many guys there, and so it was those units really bore a lot of the brunt, and not just these like secretive one-off type things, but we're talking like big, like the Iraq surge, or or the Battle of Ramadi,
Yeah.
things like that, to where those units were in those too. It wasn't just some sort of sexy little Omega thing. It was like, no, you're in these big campaigns. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. Did you ever feel like some of the skill sets, because speaking of like Dick Marcinko, uh one of I think he talks about maybe in that book, Road Warrior, doing like the red team
Mm,
drills, like trying
yeah.
to being like on nuclear anti-proliferation mission sets, obviously hostage rescue, HVT, that type of stuff. But considering it that, I mean, development group too, is you're kind of supposed to be testing new equipment, testing
Yeah.
new tactics, testing a lot of that shit. If your kind of op tempo is just nonstop, and you're kind of getting just doing everything, how did you guys stay on top of some of the that leading edge of soft mission sets, I guess?
Yeah, with a lot of like caffeine and nicotine. Just kidding. No,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
I would say that's a great question. When it came to things, to your point on like red cell,
Oh, yeah,
when
sorry,
I
go
got
ahead.
there, that kind of phased out a little bit,
Mm,
and I don't know if it's back on. I have no idea, to be honest. But
yeah.
we were, because we had those two wars going on, and then you're also standing by for like a pager on, legitimately, for a hostage rescue anywhere in the world. So you have, that's like your center of gravity. Like that's what you're focused on. And
Yeah.
when you're not doing that, you're training to do that.
Yeah.
Going to schools, qualifications, leave, so guys can get a little break. But to answer your question, that was mostly the focus. But when it came to research and development of like weapons, tactics, techniques, we were doing a lot of that. And that's why those wars were allowed us to really, like, that was like our canvas, if you
Yeah.
will, to be able to like try out new radio systems, new techniques, new weapon systems, because we were so active. I remember even in Iraq, there'd be times you'd go out, 3 times in a day, oftentimes, right? And then you do that every day. Or you might go out the next day, you can finally get a break, and it's only like a one mission where you hop on a little bird and hop on the rooftop of something, come back, and it's like, oh my gosh, we only had to work for an hour today.
Yeah.
However, it's there's always a grind, but that allowed us to really develop a lot of gear and a lot of techniques because of that. And I was able to, having that mentality of research and development, I brought that into, and I don't want to get ahead, but one more wave. And when we were making customized surfboards for different injuries, and so I just took that mentality of innovation that
Right.
I learned at DEVGRU and brought it into one more wave. Not just me, by the way, but knowing that to be able to like have that idea to bring in other people who were great at it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. So you're kind of getting to develop new tools and tactics, try out new stuff, kind of on the
Yep.
job, basically.
Yeah.
Now I want to transition into kind of some of the less sexy stuff that you did, but
Sure.
before we kind of get into it, just I'll give the people what they want. Tell them whatever you want to talk about regarding the UBL mission, and
Sure.
you must have been pretty young guy on that mission as well, or were you kind of seasoned a little bit at this point?
Yeah. Well, at that point, I was an assault team leader, so I had been at the development group for, let's see here, 8 years at that point. I'd probably, I don't know, maybe 12 or 13 combat deployments. So I definitely had,
Some
earned my
Baja
right
miles.
assault team. Yeah, some Baja. I was an assault team leader, which means I was in charge of about 7 or 8 guys, assaulters on Red Squadron. And so we just gotten back from deployment from Afghanistan, and then I remember we got off of leave, and they said, "Hey, they picked basically all of the senior guys, the team leaders, and 2 ICs are second in charge of teams, and they're like, hey, we're gonna have a meeting in this room." And we went in. We thought it was going to be something to do with Libya, because at the time we were bombing Libya, and then they're like, and long story short, we would end up getting briefed at another location that like this was the guy that we're going to go after, UBL. And when that happened, I remember just feeling almost like anxious because we had been
Yeah.
after this guy forever, not just him but his network. And I remember thinking like, there's no way he's going to be there, even though and I'm not a negative person. I'm actually like lean more on the positive side of things. But I was just like, realistically, no. We've had spins or essentially work like intelligence saying like, hey, we're going to spin up, quote unquote, and go after him here. And sometimes it goes, sometimes it doesn't. And so I just thought it was likely one of those. However, when they briefed us on it, I walked in and there's just these very high ranking people that were there. And I just thought, okay, this is going to be interesting.
Mhm.
And then they told us, and I felt like puking.
Wow.
Everybody wants to be like, really? You felt like that? I'm like,
Wow.
yeah, like, I mean, I'm a human, right? Like
Yeah.
you get told that that's it. And so, and also the flight in was going to be, we're closer to India than we were Afghanistan. That's how deep it was. And the country of Pakistan had no idea, we were basically invading a country. And so, um, it was a high risk to say the least. However, we did a workup for it. All the guys took it very seriously. And then, and yeah, I'll pause right there. I don't know how much more you want to know on that. I mean, I can talk about the actual mission, but the workup to it.
Yeah, sure. You want to talk about, the actual mission itself? Oh, I
Sure.
have a
Yeah.
question to follow on. I'll ask you after.
Yeah.
It's about
Sure.
this. Okay, really quick. I'll ask you actually before you go into the mission itself. This is more kind of like your theory, but do you really? I mean, we kind of knew where he was in late 2001. I mean, the Tora
Mm-hmm.
Bora
Mm-hmm.
operation happened, I think, before Christmas that year. Maybe it's slightly wrong about that, but it was early. And then it was like nothing for, all the way up until 2011, 2012. What do you do? How did we kind of lose him for so long when it seemed like there were CNN interviews with him like in 1999?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question, and I can only speculate. I think that he went. Of course, there's going to be people with conspiracy theories, this and that. I mean, there's people that still think that we never killed him. It's like, all right, dude, trust me, trust me, he's dead as disco.
He's living with Epstein.
Yeah, trust me. I had his elbow in my side, flying out of that on a helo. But like, but that's a good. He escaped right through our fingertips in Tora Bora, and then went very underground in Pakistan. I can speculate. I don't know whether he was being protected by the Pakistanis. It's very possible.
Sure.
But then he went real deep underground. Like when the movie Zero Dark 30 does a pretty good job of, I believe, for a movie, of showcasing the depths of, I guess, his secrecy, where his couriers would, there was no electronic signature for him or anything. So they went real deep underground, even though he was hiding in plain sight, but he never left that compound. So, his compound walls were super high. Right. So to answer your question, I don't know, to be honest. Right. Like I just know that he did slip through our fingertips in Tora Bora, and then went underground, deep underground. And whether he was hidden by somebody, it's very possible. I don't know. Whether it was the Pakistan, I have no idea. But somehow he was able to pull it off.
Wild.
For that long.
So mission itself, you want to hop into that, and then we'll kind of transition into some of the after. I'd segue, but talk about it.
Yeah, happy to. So I remember, when we finally flew over there, and I still thought there's no way this is going to go down. There's no way the president at the time, President Obama, and it's not against him. I just mean a president in general I didn't think they'd have the guts to just send a team, like I said, further into Pakistan, closer to India than it was Afghanistan. Right. Without them, Pakistanis knowing, and also the anti-air aircraft, like they had a bunch of like surface-to-air missiles and batteries and F-16s and all these things that were likely going to be able to shoot us down. And we even planned for that in our helicopters, that each helicopter, if one got shot down, the other one, it wasn't turning around to save it. It's on, right? This is American payback. So if one gets shot down, we're not looking back. We're going to just keep flying that next one. And each helicopter was designed to essentially be able to create everything with a skeleton crew. To be able to pull off the mission. Wow. So that when one got shot down, that the other one would just fly right in there. And another thing that we ran into too was weight. And for people who don't know, like with playing with helicopters and all that, you really have to worry about the weight because we were so far in. And with the weight, we weren't able to do something called speedballs. For the listeners who don't know, it's like lots of times on big combat operations, you have like a bag or a backpack that you put in a bunch of extra bullets and grenades and whatever, so you don't run out. There might be one for ammo. There might be one for medical supplies for the medics, and there might be one for like food and water, and it just depends. But we didn't have that luxury because of weight. So it was like, we're not going to have that. And it was like, okay, so I'm going to carry a bunch of my own ammo. Yeah. And then it's like, you're too heavy. You can't have that. And then it's like, oh, okay. I was like, well, what happens if we can't get out in 38 minutes? And it was like, then you're going to have to Alamo up. And then it's like, well, then what? And it's like, well, you're either going to be killed or you're going to be a political prisoner. And then it was like, okay, so you're telling me I have to take limited weapons, so limited stuff. And it's like, yeah. And it was like, okay. So I remember going on I ended up not even taking a pistol to lose weight on it. And I always had a pistol, but I just was like, okay, that's one thing. I'm going to leave. And it's like, even for my ammo, like on my chest rod, I only had a total of 4 magazines, a couple grenades, a breaching charge. And that was it. And it wasn't just me, that's all of us. And it was, if we crash a helicopter, or if something happens, we're not gonna make it. And it was just like, you just accept it because of the gravity of the mission and what we were about to do and how we were able. Like, it was for the American people. It was for the New Yorkers. It, like, truly, even saying it now, I get goosebumps thinking about how fortunate I felt. It was like, we have the opportunity to do this, and we'll die doing this if we need to, because of it. And it's kind of like, when I think of it now in 2026, it's like, wow, that's a little. Okay, but in that moment, it truly was, because I knew we were lucky to get selected. Yeah. That there's other JSOC squadrons that could have done it, whether it's in a DEVGRU or the Army. I know that. And so all of that was happening within you. So back to the loadout. So you didn't have as much ammo. We knew that there's a chance, I'm not going to say like get too dramatic, but we knew there was a good chance that we either would get shot down or on the way back not have enough fuel to get out. On the flight in, let me back up. Before, I remember taxiing on the runway and just thinking there's still no way this was going to go. There's no way. There's no way. And then it's like, and then I could hear the rotors start to like, they start to give it a little, a little like power. And I'm like, oh yeah, whatever. They're just, and then all of a sudden, like the bird starts to like taxi. And I'm still like, yeah, right. Hopefully we don't miss mid-rats, like the food, the chow. I'm like, that's where I'm at. I mean, don't get me wrong. Of course, I was a professional. I was like, in my mind, I was locked in. But I still was like, it's not like a normal operation where you're going to be in Afghanistan. We're like, yeah, likely we're going to go unless a mechanical issue on a helicopter or something. But it was like, we're not going to fly all the way in. And then all of a sudden it takes off and I'm just like, well, I'll be damned. Yeah. We're going. But the flight in was long, like an hour and a half to just be sitting there in your mind of everything. And it was a long time to think about things. It was a long time to also think about like, wow, what we're embarking on right now, no matter what happens, whether it's going to be a positive result, hopefully, or a negative result, the whole world is going to know what happened tonight. And then it was like, oh man, and then you start feeling the pressure of, if we fuck this up, we're going to make America look bad. Not just our unit, not just the SEAL teams, not just whatever. It's like the whole world is going to think we're, incapable. And then also the want to be able to have payback for America and payback for the New Yorkers. And as we were flying in, I remember just envisioning and watching people, jumping out of the Twin Towers and just thinking like, what is their family going to think? Like, man, we had this opportunity. And then I, to be honest, I was starting to like, as a leader, because my job was to take my assault team right up the middle of his compound. Right. So it was like, so to me, I'm like, you need to lock it the fuck on, dude. That's where my mindset was. And it was like, I realized that I was starting to kind of get in my own head. And I remember just like looking out the helicopter windows and seeing these rocks, and it looked a lot like East County, San Diego. And, and I love San Diego. And I was like, okay, I was thinking about San Diego. I was thinking about surfing. And I was like, okay, you're back. Took some deep breaths, kind of just calmed down my nervous system. And then just went right back into all the tasks that I needed to do. So it was like, I mean, essentially you're flying into the Super Bowl, but you have to wait for an hour and a half. And and I don't even want to compare it to the Super Bowl, because in the Super Bowl, nobody's dying. You know what I mean? Or nobody's embarrassing their country if they fuck it up. And so, we were just, flying in. There's a lot of stuff going on in our minds. We were concerned. I was at least about getting shot down. I'm not overly concerned, because what are you going to do if you do? But like, it was just like, I always felt like I'd be okay if I can just get my feet on the ground with my kit on and my gear and my training. I'm like, as long as I have that, whether if I'm out of a helicopter, a fixed wing for a hey-ho or a ground mobility, whatever it is, as long as I can get my feet on the ground, I have a fighting chance. But when you're in that vulnerable state of flying, it's just kind of, you're waiting for it. But I remember as we flew up, and the helicopter I was in, our job was to fly right in the middle of the courtyard, throw a fast rope out, and fast rope right in the middle of the courtyard. Now, sometimes people will be like, well, why did you guys plan to just fly right to the X like that? Isn't that super dangerous? And yes, it was. But the thing was, it was all about weights and time. We didn't have the luxury to just do something else. It was like, we don't have time. You're going to get there, get out as fast as possible, take it down as fast as possible, and get the fuck out. And so as we flew up right in front, I remember I was holding on to my buddy, who's a really big dude, and he was going to be the one that threw out, there's a sniper next to him covering, he was going to throw out the fast rope and follow it, and I was going to go right behind him. And as we pulled right up in front of the compound, the whole world spun, and we just spun right out of control. And then the pilot, thankfully being world class, was able to take the nose of the helicopter. It was a special helicopter with a special almost beak, like a bird beak, and was able to drive it into the ground to stabilize it. However, the helicopter, the tail of it was on this like 15, 20-foot wall, right? So we were like at a 40 foot, like hanging there. And then the helo starts like rocking back. And so like right off the bat, second 1, 2, and 3, it's like, holy shit, there's the compound. And then like, holy shit, we're spinning out of control. Holy shit, we just impacted. And I, myself and pretty much a good majority of the guys, at the time I had herniated discs in my back from the crash, but I didn't feel it because I was amping. Yeah. And I remember I was still holding on to my buddy, and you can feel the helicopter was starting to yaw or whatever like that. It was starting to go side to side a little bit. And I remember thinking of old training of, and having been in previous helicopter crash before, like, don't just jump out while the blades are still turning. Like, wait until it like slows down so you don't get your head lopped off as it's turning back and forth. And so I remember, so we impacted and we're kind of like waiting, which felt like forever, but likely just a second or two at the most. And I'm holding on my friend. And then I, like, being a team leader, I just wanted to look over to see how many guys got tossed out of the bird. Thankfully, there wasn't any, but I just like glanced over, and then while I did that, I kind of let up on grabbing the back of his kit, and then he just jumped off and just like jumped out and started running. And he's a big dude, and I remember seeing him be like, oh, his head's gonna get lopped off, and then he ran right through. You can see the blades, and it's just like. Zoom. And he like it must. I don't know. I mean, I thought his head was gonna get lopped off, but obviously it didn't. And I just thought to myself, well, damn, I gotta go. Right? I can't let him go alone. And so, yeah, man, like, okay, fine, whatever. Like, I guess this is how I won't even know if it happens, type thing. And so, just followed him, and then ran up, and the rest of the guys were behind us. But I never looked back. I recall that later. I never looked back at the helo because of the mindset. If I just knew, like, what good would it do? I know guys in my mind. I'm like, I know guys are all over the place, and I know now this mission's gone to shit. But you know what? Our mission is to take out the man if he's here. So we still didn't know, and so it was like I didn't look back, which is weird to me. But I'm like, well, that's because it was such a no-fail mission. Like, we knew guys likely would die. So we start running up. That same guy breaches one of the gates. We run in, and then I ran up to my team, as I mentioned, was going to go right up the middle, and I just knew that like, there's a very high chance that there was going to be a suicide vest, that there was going to be a houseborne IED, at least in my opinion, in my experience, because the higher up that we would go up targeting the Al Qaeda cells, the higher up you would get, the more fanatical they would get. So the more, and with the fanaticism would be more suicide vest and so forth. And so, I thought likely there would be that. And so I remember running up, and even beforehand, I was telling myself, no matter what, I'm going to be the first one in that building that sets foot as that assault team leader, even though that's not normally how that goes. Usually the assault team leader is kind of hanging back to just coordinate things.
Yeah.
But I just thought, and it wasn't just me, Alex Wetz, it's a mentality of any of those guys, was just like, if anybody's going to die doing it, I'm going to lead my team right up the middle and do it. And I'm going to be like, if any, like, I can't not be that guy.
Yeah.
And so, ran in. I don't want to get too far into the details, but we, started engaging and taking care of business on the first floor, and then another building across in the compound. Same thing was happening. One of the guys got shot in his bolt cutters, and it fragged his trap, which is, thankfully, that's all he had. Kind of $1 million wound, thank goodness. That was going on, and then even then, I still did not think that he was there, right? And then finally, I remember there was a stairwell that was going up, and there was a big metal door on that first floor, and the same breacher went up and started placing a charge on there. And my job was now coordinating, like, hey, don't come in just yet. We're throwing on this big, because we were throwing on a big charge on this one, because we had just crashed. We're not fucking around anymore. If there's anybody behind it, you're going to feel it. And oh, by the way, it's, like, yeah, like, we're here. Like, we're not messing around. We're not going to do a failed breach and then do it again. We don't have time for that. So we throw in a pretty big charge. And I remember, like, sitting there coordinating on the radio, getting guys out of the way. And then just as I was like, okay, send it to him, telling him, like, yeah, you're good, go and send it. I knew we had a couple seconds for his delayed fuse to go. And I remember getting behind cover, and for like 2 seconds, just thinking, holy shit, we crashed, we're fucked. And there's a metal door. Yeah. Likely this is the guy. And then boom, it goes off. We go, the rest of the guys come in, we start taking it down. They engage the son on the stairwell, and then they go up and engage and take out UBL. And then I was in charge of all of, like, the SSE, which is essentially all of the intelligence that was on that target, which was a lot. And then I do remember this, though, as this is all happening, it's like kind of chaotic. The actual target was not that complex. We had done way harder targets in Iraq and Afghanistan. However, it was the gravity of who it was. Yeah. And it was also the speed that we had to be out of that in 38 minutes, or we were going to be left. And that's why I thought we were not going to make it, is because now it's like, well, we crashed a helicopter. There's no way we're going to get out on time. Unbeknownst to me, they launched the QRF from Afghanistan in regular 47s, which was ballsy as hell if you ask me. They were just like, we're not going to let our guys, like, we're going to send in, we're going to throw everything at it. Like, and unbeknownst to us, though, we were like, we're hanging out there, and there was like communication stuff. I wasn't on the SATCOM radio talking to Afghanistan. I was on the internal comms, coordinating the assault. So then after that was happening, we're getting out all of our, the intelligence, we're getting stuff. I heard like, hey, he was here, we got him. And, like for God and country, Geronimo type thing, that was a thing that was a call that went out, and just thinking like, great. I mean, like, fuck yeah, and we need to get out of here.
Yeah.
And I remember there was so much stuff there to grab. I remember my master chief saying like, okay, you guys, like the chalk or the helicopter, like you guys need to get out with the body, with bin Laden. Like, so, we were starting to do that. I was like, hey, to my master chief, like, there's so much stuff here. Like, can I get a couple more minutes? And then him saying like, oh no, you know what you can do? You can just stay there. If you really want to be there, you can just stay there if you think it's that important. And I was like, good one. It was like funny. Yeah. I was like, okay, got it. Roger that, Master Chief. I'm getting on the flight.
We got it.
And so I remember we get into that helicopter, and then I remember just bin Laden's body was just this lanky old man, and his elbows in my side, and I'm just covered in laptops and all of this. Finally, we take off. They blow the helicopter that had crashed, and then the QRF came in, got the rest of the guys out. And then still, I was like, I don't know if we're going to pull this off. And then as we're flying to something that essentially was a fuel refuel point that we had created in Pakistan. It's basically a field with a big fuel bladder, a couple guys there for like basically a little top off because we didn't have enough fuel to make it back. And as we're flying in to that fuel point in Pakistan, the lights on the bird start flashing, and the crew chief comes over and says like, hey guys, get ready, make sure you're clipped in, we might go in, as far as like we're going to run out of fuel and crash. And it was before that. It was funny because half the guys on that helicopter had been in helicopter crashes before, to include myself. And we had joked about like, hey, who's been on a helicopter crash? And half the guys raised their hand like, okay, who's been in 2? Because bad things come in 3, So has anybody been in 2? And we're like, no, only 1. And so we were like, all right, great. And then I remember like thinking that, where it's like, holy shit, we're going to all be in our 3rd helicopter crash. 2 in the same night.
Yeah.
But, obviously that didn't happen. The crews got us in on fumes, and we ended up topping off and getting back. And that, and then finally getting back to Afghanistan. And I'll never forget when we flew into Afghanistan, the pilot, one of the pilots came on the radio and just said, I bet you guys never thought you'd be so happy to be back in Afghanistan. And we were all like fist pumping, like, holy shit, we pulled it off. And then, kind of like, I'm happy to go into more or less on that, but that's kind of, we got back, turned over all the stuff, the body, all of those things. And then I just remember, we were working all the way until like, the next day with that, and then stopping for a moment to watch President Obama walk down and address the nation while we're still all in our camis and everything, and just being like, whoa, I can't believe it made it real. It's like, I can't believe we pulled that off.
Yeah.
But fortunately, we were, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. Not that we weren't good, but we definitely had a lot of luck too.
Yeah. Now, I want to kind of transition to the stuff that you did after, kind of your healing journey. But I know that the helicopter crashes, as well as some TBIs, traumatic brain injury, stuff that you dealt with there, talk a little bit about the cost of this high-speed life on your body, and when it kind of felt like it had caught up to you.
Yes, great question. So, after that mission, our tours kept going. That wasn't like it. It was like, okay, we were back. I remember in 2013, and it was my last tour as a team leader, and I was struggling so bad from mental health stuff, PTSD, depression, suicidal ideation, traumatic brain injury. I had been a breacher before, a lot of explosive breaches, especially danger close ones in combat. And I was really, wheels were coming off. And there was a moment that I was even sitting in my room in Jalalabad, Afghanistan, and I had my assault rifle on my lap. And I was like, not just suicidal ideation, but there was a plan. I was going to finish it right then and there. And then all of a sudden, as that was happening, our base got attacked by the Taliban.
Oh my
and
God.
ironically, was saved by the Taliban, because as a team leader, I was like, oh shit, I got to go man the wall with my team. I've got to coordinate X, Y, and Z. Got to get the JTAC and start talking to air assets and all of
Yeah.
this stuff. And it just snapped me out of it, where it's like, boom, boom, and we start getting attacked. Sirens are going, and it's like we knew that we had to man those positions, and so it snapped me right out of that. And like as I mentioned, ironically, the Taliban saved my
Yeah.
life from myself. And then after that, I knew that the wheels were coming off. I was in the National Intrepid Center of Excellence, or NICO, which is a traumatic brain injury clinic in Bethesda Hospital, like you kind of alluded to it earlier. And it was there that I was like, I was like, okay, I need to do something different. And at the Dev Group, I was getting great opportunities to continue my career there, higher leadership roles and this and that. But I just knew that I won't live past those. It was like, I won't live. I will likely kill myself. And so I took a job. I took a shore duty position out in San Diego, or training positions for my last like 4 years. But it was there that the one thing that I was always passionate about, always felt good about therapeutically, was surfing. I picked up surfing in the Navy, and I knew no matter what, whether I had a great surf day, a bad surf day, conditions were great or bad, or even if they were great and I surfed bad, whatever it was, like
Yeah.
I always felt better coming out of the ocean than when I went in. And so I started volunteering at the Naval Hospital Surf Clinic, and
Yeah.
started noticing that there wasn't any like true adaptive stuff for some of these amputees and burn victims and spinal, like there was nothing like handled. There was some stuff, but it wasn't like very world class. And long story short, I ended up just having this idea to start this nonprofit, One More Wave. And I started it from a nonprofit for dummies book, and just had no fucking idea about anything. I mean, I could tell you anything you want to know about tactical shooting or kill house or whatever, but I couldn't tell you about what a 501c3 was. And I didn't know, none of the people in my network knew what that was either. So it just started off really small with that nonprofit for dummies book. Started slinging t-shirts out of the back of my truck to fund going to moose lodges, Rotary clubs, to try to raise anybody that would listen to me talk. And then started raising some money. And then we got our first board, a second board. And then before you know, now today, we have 8 chapters across the country that surf every third Saturday. That when the weather's nice, it's anywhere from 300 to 400 people across the country surf on that day. We facilitate daily surf meetups. I know, Jordan, you've been involved with a lot and
Yeah.
supported us with your organization, which I really appreciate from the beginning, from a long time ago too. And we've done a customized surfing solution. So like for the listeners, it's like, how do you make a surfboard for an arm amputee? How do you make it for a leg amputee? All of these things, and not just like do it to just say like, quote unquote, we surfed. It's more of like, to me, I was like, I don't want to just say like, yeah, quote unquote, surf. Why can't you be a motherfucking surfer? Why can't you? Because I felt like, okay, passion, in my opinion, I'm gonna use like a ski analogy. Like on ski slopes, like when you start off the bunny slope, right? So it's like pizza sliced French fries, with your skis,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like kind of like really basic, right? You're just starting out. But then when you're getting a little bit more confident, you get into the green hill, right? And from there, the progression to the blue and the black, and then maybe you go to more challenging places. But that's where the passion lies, I believe, is that next thing. And
Yeah.
if you're not able to do that, then people are gonna like peter out and not be interested. And what I noticed with a lot of these surfing nonprofits, which were great, but all they were doing was getting them on a basic foam top surfboard, getting them in some white water, and just pushing them into it and be like, we did it, high
You surf.
five.
Right.
And I noticed that. I noticed it I could feel energetically, a lot of these veterans were like, okay, cool, thanks. And it was like, to me, I'm like, well, why can't we get them to the blue? Why can't we? Maybe he's missing 2 legs. Like, why can't we? Like, safely, of course, and with innovation in the boards. And so that's what we started doing. And, we've done now like 760 adaptive, surfboards, grants at $2,500 a piece. We are in, we've had world champions, veteran world champions in adaptive surfing. That's their thing. I don't want to take that away. It wasn't one way. It's all of them. However, we as an organization are so proud that we were able to help provide them with some of these surfing solutions, oftentimes with their feedback. So anyway, that's I kind of went off on a rabbit hole on that
No,
one.
no,
But once you
that's
get me
great.
talking on one more wave, I won't shut up.
No, dude, that's amazing. And yeah, One More Wave has been such an amazing organization. And yeah, that it was the San Diego Surf Medical Clinic, surf clinic that kind of got me into surfing as well. And that
Awesome.
was sort of my connection there. I wanted to ask a quick question about, you're talking about TBIs and PTSD, depression, these things. From your speculation, how much of that this suicidal ideation, depression, do you think was physical, as in like there's something physically wrong with your brain right at this point, and it's causing these kind of behavioral issues in that sense, versus how much of it was like psychological or spiritual, in the sense that like you were kind of now starting to really feel the weight of what you were doing, or you know what I mean? Did you have feel that way, or what do you think it was?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, and I'd love to answer that. So what I think happens, not just for me, but for a lot of veterans, especially from that era, veterans in general, there's a lot going on, right? So you have your traumatic brain injury or mild traumatic brain injury, and a lot of those symptoms or symptomology uh, can look a lot like depression, can look a lot like PTSD. Like mood swings, depressed states, cognitive issues. Like I found myself in the parking lot of the grocery store. I didn't even know I was going to the grocery store, those types of things. Like, so that is, I would say, akin to a more I would say physical, because I know when I did brain scans they could see scar tissue in my
Yeah,
brain. So
right.
I would imagine somehow that impacts the neuroplasticity or the neural pathways to be able to communicate properly. But what you get with, it's like one big like Venn diagram. So you have like your TBI, and then on the other side you have your, let's say, depression, major depressive disorder. And with that is like, trouble finding motivation to do anything, overeating, undereating, isolating, just depressed mood, that type of thing, which can look a lot like TBI also.
Yeah,
And then you have in there too, you have PTSDs in there. And what each one of these things, and those, like classic flashbacks, isolating again, there's a lot of things too. But the problem is now they all start overlapping, and it's almost like each one is throwing fuel on each other's fire, right? So it's like now it's just kind of getting out of control. So there's a lot of psychological stuff going on there with the PTSD and the major depressive disorder. And then there's like the physical aspect of the brain with maybe some scar tissue. And what starts coming in there too with the PTSD, what's different with a lot of veteran PTSD versus standard PTSD is you're getting a lot of moral injury. And what I mean by moral injury, which is different, it's almost like another level. And I don't mean like it's better or worse or whatever. It's just unique, oftentimes, not only to veterans, but it's very unique as like a large population for veterans. And what I mean by moral injury is, man, I can't believe I thought that was combative. And when I shot
mm-hmm.
that person, it was an
Mm-hmm.
unarmed teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Or I blew that charge and it killed a kid, or whatever it might be. And so that to me is like, that is deep. That's a deep wound, right? And that might be different than not to compare, but a classic like a bad car wreck or something like that.
Yeah,
That somebody
right.
might be in. And once again, not to compare one's better or worse, but it is unique to that. So
Yeah.
PTSD within veterans very oftentimes with that moral injury. And then what you throwing one more thing on top of that happens is now you get the culture of drinking in the
Mm-hmm.
military, right? So like it's just for people who don't know, it's just part of the culture. You're always like partying, boozing, all of that. And then, however, which is, I get it, you're like the age of maybe a college like frat guy. I get that, right? But the thing is, it's not helpful because you start throwing that, and then now that becomes a crutch. And oftentimes what you'll see with the veterans is the more the intensity of operations and trauma goes up, so does the drinking, because they're self medicating because that's working for them, at least in that moment. Of course, it's not working for them, but for the short term, it's getting you through that next, like those symptoms that are coming up. So it's a whole, like I experienced all of those, and that. Oh, let me back up. And when that starts happening, all of those things start overlapping through and fuel on its fire. And now you have a culture also of not seeking help. Like if you go in to seek help, I remember being like, I don't want to go in because I don't want to not like lose my access to deploying or to the armory. and,
Yeah.
and now that I think back on it, I'm like, dude, I wish I could have just like grabbed myself and been like, bro, you're fine, just get help. But that was the mentality. And then, so yeah, there's a lot going on, and I hope that maybe somebody that listens to this hears that and is
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
because you're not alone. Like that, these are things, and why it's so important to get involved in community things. Like I'm gonna, not just to pitch one more wave, but why we have those chapters, right? Because you get around other people. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying do that, and this is coming from as a clinician. Don't get away from your therapy, but however, have that is just as important, if not more, in my opinion. If you have a community, especially when you get out, it's one thing when you're in, you've got a platoon, a squad, a team, whatever. Guys are looking out for each other. But now it's like you've moved out, and now I don't have that, and nobody's really inviting me to the barbecue or whatever it is. And now that's where it gets dangerous for veterans, and that's where they start dipping into pills and booze, and then it can get dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think the culture has changed a little bit in more recent times? Like, yeah.
I think so, and I hope so, because as I was getting out, once again, I'm kind of like a space cowboy at this point, but like I was, I retired in 18, and like those last couple of years, things were a little bit different. I remember the younger guys coming in, everything from even like nutrition and working out, like instead of like crazy grinder PTs and run swims, not that those were happening. But instead of that, it was like there's a professional strength trainer,
Mm-hmm.
that's like working through. There's a dietitian, and the drinking wasn't, I'm not saying it's still not prevalent, but I feel like the knob went down a peg.
Yeah.
Even if it was like from a 10 to a 9,
Yeah.
it still
Yeah.
went down, which I'm hopeful at least. And I want to, and that's why I like doing things like this. And I appreciate the opportunities to normalize this
Yeah.
stuff,
For
that,
sure.
you can be a SEAL Team 6 guy
Mm-hmm.
and get therapy, or a Delta Force, or a MARSOC guy, whatever, an Airwolf pilot. Just kidding.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
you're just, you're a firefighter, whatever. It's just like a lot of cultures that kind of frown against it, but it's like, no, actually, you deserve it, one, and two, by you getting help, you'll maximize your potential to be able to be a better version of yourself for that team, and the longevity of it. Because if you don't reach out and get it, like, and if you want a career in any of those types of fields, it's like you got to be able to hang around, and at some point you're like 50-60% is not going to get the job done, and you
Yeah.
might just get your ass shit canned.
Right. No.
Because you didn't get help.
Totally. Now, I've seen on some of your social media stuff, you've been doing a lot of work with like EMDR and kind of integrating. I've seen, I don't know exactly what you're doing, so pardon my ignorance, but stuff with like feathers, and it looks almost like an integration of some, I don't know if it's Native American or it's just
It
more
is.
kind of, yeah. So you want to talk a little bit about that, and what is
Yeah.
EMDR stuff?
Sure. So yeah, so I am an associate mental health therapist here in Nashville, and I have a big focus on trauma, of working with trauma. But yeah, to your question, so EMDR is one of the tools that I use, and it stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is like, I know, some crazy long word. But what that means is it's bilateral stimulation. So what I'll do, or a practitioner will do, is whether it's like headphones, a light bar, like an ID, not ID, geez, LED light bar that goes back and forth. There's like tappers, like things that buzz, whatever. It's just something that activates each hemisphere of the brain. And by activating each hemisphere of the brain in these like short little, depends on the style, but let's just call it 25 seconds, repetitions of 25 seconds, it can now start to open up new neural pathways, or ways that the brain is transferring thoughts. So an example might be, if I'm in San Diego on the I-5, heading north, and that's like, and that represents my thought pattern of how I thought about my trauma, was always just driving up the north, I-5 north, and that's how it is, and I'm stuck in there, and I've been thinking about that for 10 years, right? And it's like overpowering. But what EMDR does is allow you to take an off ramp, right? And think about it differently. Like, oh, you know what? Like, I had to do what I had to do in that situation. And then from there, it can be really powerful. And it's one of the most used treatments for trauma out there. So I use EMDR. I also use clinical hypnosis. But hypnosis isn't like stage hypnosis where you're on there and somebody's like, bark like a dog and walk like a duck or whatever. It's not like that at all. All it does is it gets a client, or a person, into a state of theta. And what theta is, there's 5 wavelengths in the brain. Theta is the wavelength that essentially, as you're waking up and like one foot's in a dream, one foot's not, you're kind of like in that in-between space. That's what theta is. And so I help clients get into that state, and then we are able to use hypnosis to basically heal from within. And that's why I love stuff where that helps you like heal, like you get the answers from within yourself, whether it's hypnosis, whether it's EMDR. And why I'm passionate and an advocate for psychedelics or psychedelic assisted therapy is because those do the same thing, in my opinion. It connects into what's inside of you. And anyway, so yeah, I do
Yeah.
that. And to your question about the smudging,
Yeah.
essentially what that is, I belong to a sweat lodge that I've been going to out here for at least 3 years monthly. And I've taken from that, some of it's like, Cherokee North American practices, but I also take some stuff from some other practices like Wachuma, which is like San Pedro mescaline ceremonies down in Peru. And I kind of bring some of that in. I'm not bringing in, by the way, for the record, I'm not doing mescaline in my office. I'm just saying I'm taking techniques like burning different woods or plants that have been used for medicine for thousands of years to try to bring in and just like clear the air for a nice like spiritual experience, basically. And it doesn't feel so clinical where it's like in a squeaky white hospital room. It's like, no, this is how they've been using these techniques for thousands of years. And so I'm basically combining the two, combining modern technology with ancient practices with the hope that it maximizes the healing potential for the client.
Right. Now, I have a couple close family friends that aren't necessarily dealing with like a trauma, in like a PTSD sense like that, but, have dealt with addiction, depression,
Mm.
and suicidal ideation. Are treatments like EMDR indicated for kind of your general depression and addiction type stuff? Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay, cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like
That's
after
right.
this,
Yeah.
I'm heading back to my office of a couple clients, and we're doing EMDR,
Yeah.
and both of them are not, without telling too much about their info, like both of them are not veterans, and both of them fit in that criteria you're talking about. And so I've used EMDR not just for trauma, for depression, but general anxiety disorder, like basically
Mm,
anxiety issues, but also ADHD. There's
yeah.
things to do with that. So
Wow.
it's a very effective tool.
Yeah.
It's not the only one in my quiver,
Sure.
but I've found that to be like groundbreaking, for me at least. And in the world of like therapy, if there's therapists here, there might be some that are like anti EMDR, some that are pro, and whatever. It's just it's like surfboards. Like I love a rusty surfboard. It's like, okay, cool. I
Yeah.
used to have one. I didn't like it. I like this one or whatever.
Sure.
Or my Sheepers, this guy. It's like, as long as I think but these are ones that I found to be effective for all of the after mentioned things you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you, maybe while you were in and you were kind of exploring the treatment that was available to you, what kind of treatments did you try then? I mean, were you
Mhm.
trying various pills of certain?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to talk
So
about
yeah, no, I was. So yeah, before the psychotropics, it was what I also do is like a lot of somatic stuff. Meaning, it's not like you get on the massage table and I'm like working out a knot. It's more of like focusing on the body and the why behind that. And this is also, I benefit from it also as a client. The why behind that is there's these big thought leaders. One being Bessel van der Kolk. He wrote this book, The Body Keeps the Score. Another psychologist named Peter Levine, who wrote The Waking Tiger. These are like a couple of the big thought leaders in trauma. Not the only ones, but a couple of the really well-known ones. And both of them feel that with trauma, 80% of trauma is stored in the body and 20% is stored in the mind. So for me as a clinician, if I'm only just doing talk therapy, I'm only tackling 20% of the trauma. So, however, if I can get in more of the somatics, EMDR, hypnosis, some of these things like that, I'm able to start targeting the full spectrum of the trauma from the mind and body. But to your question about medications, I was on medications before. At some point, I was struggling so bad. I was actually on 5 psychotropic medications and really struggling. Wheels were coming off, like I said. And then I finally was, in 2020. I had a friend of mine that told me, like, "Hey man, I'm worried. This is after I've been out. I'm worried that you're gonna do something to yourself. You need to change. Like, come with me to go do Ibogaine."
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what Ibogaine was. I kind of heard it here and there, but I was like, I knew it was psychedelic. And I remember asking him, like, okay, what does that mean? And he's like, well, we're going to have to go out of the country to do it. And I was like, well, why? And he's like, because it's illegal. But he's like, but I think this is, this helped a lot of our guys from our community. He named off a handful of guys who I didn't even know had done that, but guys I respected and cared about. And I was like, wow, okay, I'll give it a shot. One thing about Ibogaine is it is very effective for substance use disorder. Because what I was doing a lot back then, was drinking. I was struggling because I was self-medicating, but I ended up getting off of the medication so that I could do the treatment, and
Mm-hmm.
I did the treatment. And since then, March of 2020, I haven't had a drink of alcohol in over 6 years. I'm no longer on any psychotropic medications. I still go to therapy, which is very important. I'm still open to, if I need psychotropic medications, I can. However, that was so groundbreaking for me, and that's what led me to getting into advocacy work for Ibogaine. And I can get into that if you'd like, of like how we were able to pass some bills and what the future of psychedelic assisted therapy is in the country, if you'd like.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely would. I had one question, and this was just like a selfish for me question, but
Yeah.
I want to hear about the Ibogaine stuff. But it's funny you talking about 80% something stored in the body versus So I've dealt with chronic pain basically since I
Mm.
got out of the military, and
Yeah.
you've just gone through kind of like every different modality, and all sorts of imaging, all sorts of everything,
Mm.
and basically they there's stuff wrong, but like it's not it doesn't seem to be 100% correlated with like, oh well, you have a physical injury right here and that's why you feel this way. I've done every physical therapy exercise 1,000 times on
Yeah.
and I
Mm.
wonder like if it is some sort of trauma stored in my body that is and like what is
Mhm.
maybe a option of something. If do you deal with any pain like that too?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I do. Yeah, where my mind goes, and I don't know,
yeah, yeah, for
would
sure.
be starting to look into, yeah, some somatic type, because there's some sort of like learned, perhaps your where my mind goes, Lisa, is that perhaps your mind is, it's like just stuck in that pain memory, and
Yeah,
it's keeps firing, and that's maybe why you're unable to get relief from some of the other the aforementioned things you had said. Um, that I think like finding a good somatic therapist might be worth it. A good body worker,
yeah,
and what I mean by that, not just a massage therapist, but like somebody who has training in trauma type body work too. That would
yeah,
be good. And then, yeah, there might be some other treatments like an Ibogaine or something. Like I don't have the data, the science
sure,
to prove it. And,
sure.
I'm not saying you should or shouldn't do that, but it might be worth exploring some of those things. Because the thing with pain is, I'm sure especially chronic pain, obviously that can be a motherfucker. And that can now bleed into depression. And it can bleed into other things. It can lead to self-medicating, all sorts of stuff that just start with pain. And I feel you, man. And I'm sorry you're going through that, because I know I've worked with a lot of clients that have that. And it's like, it doesn't mean you're not tough. Doesn't
Yeah,
mean you can't handle it. It just means like this shit won't end,
yeah,
and it's driving me fucking
yeah,
crazy. And,
yeah,
the dark clouds are coming over me. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well, offline, I'll see if you have anyone you'd recommend. But yeah, tell me a
yeah,
little bit about the political action that you have engaged with, and
yeah,
then we'll wrap up at 1:30, or so we'll
yeah.
get out of here in time. But yeah,
Awesome.
to talk about it, because there's great stuff moving in that direction.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be able to talk about it. So I am an ambassador for an organization called Americans for Ibogaine, or AFI for short. And there's two gentlemen that started it. One, Brian Hubbard, and previous Texas Governor Rick Perry. And what we are is an advocacy group. We don't provide the treatment. We don't do anything like that. We're essentially trying to get the clinical trials of Ibogaine approved throughout the country, so that our hope is that the science will showcase what we believe to be true of how effective these treatments are. And these treatments, what we've seen so far, and the promise in at least, is that substance use disorder, that's a big one for it. Now, and I want to talk about that. What I mean by substance use disorder, it's like anything that one might be addicted to: alcohol, opioids, whatever. But here in the state of Tennessee, we have the second highest death rate for opioid overdoses in the country. There's something like 8 people die per day in Tennessee, which is a lot for a small state.
Yeah,
And a lot of that goes back to Appalachia, the opioid epidemic, the
sure.
Sackler family, Purdue Pharma, all of that. And there's a lot of poor regions here too, and a lot of that opioids, oxycodone, then rolled right into heroin, and that's what we're dealing with here in the state of Tennessee and across the country. The thing with Ibogaine and some of the initial tests and trials is that let me back up. When one goes to the standard treatment for, let's say, substance use disorder, opioids addiction, right, what's going to happen is they're going to get on some sort of like Suboxone, some kind of a drug, right? And then from there, which is ironic on who makes that. The same
Yeah.
pharmaceutical companies that were the ones that made oxycodone, right, are now the ones providing this this pretty poor solution. But whatever it is, like kind of basically it mimics the effects of heroin or opioids on the body without getting you high, right? So it has that. So standard treatments are you get on something like Suboxone, and then you get into like treatments like Narcotics Anonymous, or maybe there's like other like group facilities, whatever it is, like a treatment facility with counseling. Now the thing is that route on your first attempt at rehab, you have a 17% chance of possibly kicking that addiction. The thing is with Ibogaine, if the same thing, if you just do one session of Ibogaine, the chance of you kicking that addiction is 78%. Now the thing is, if you do it twice, it goes up to like 88%, and on it goes. So and that's what got me wanting, not only for my own benefit from Ibogaine, not just for substance use, but for PTSD, and it's really good. We hope, or what we feel, but science needs to prove it, is for traumatic brain injury. And so all of those things together can be very, we're hoping, effective. And so here in Tennessee, I was with a team, Tennesseans for Ibogaine, and we were just doing a lot of advocacy work up at the Capitol. And, we probably had to go up there 8 times. I thought you would just go up. I didn't know anything about advocacy. I thought you go up and you would essentially just like in front of like, I don't know, the Congress or the Senate or whatever, you give your little spiel and then they go right to a vote and they're like, yes or no. And that would be it. But that's not the case. It's like, if anybody remembers, I'm kind of dating myself here, but when I was growing up, there was a Nintendo game called Mike Tyson's Punch Out. And essentially all it was like, you're the little boxer that you want to work your way up to fight the champ. Right. But the thing is, you got to work your way all the way through all the people that get there, like any kind of like boxing title. Right. So that's how it was with this. So we would have to go to like the House subcommittee before we move to okay, you're good, to the House Health Committee, to then, the Finance Committee. And then now you got the Senate side. And so anyway, we're like the team that I was on, we were able to essentially like keep going and we're making our way all the way up to where it finally got approved, to where something called the Hope Treatment Act. And it got approved to allow us to do clinical trials of Ibogaine here in the state of Tennessee. And if you would have asked me, while we were starting, do you think this would pass? I would say, I mean, yes, perhaps in my lifetime, I think it would.
Yeah.
But I don't know if here in the Deep South and the Bible Belt, if they're going to get on board with psychedelic assisted therapy or clinical trials of it. However, we were able to do. I thought our team was going to be the one that just kind of like normalize the language, and the next generation would be the ones to make it happen. However, Governor Rick Perry and Brian Harvard were on Joe Rogan's podcast, and they kind of asked him like, hey, I know you have a connection with the president. Can you at least reach out to him to see if he can do anything about helping push this mission that we're doing? And so he did. And then that led the president to sign an executive order in Washington, D.C. About 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago. That then kind of normalized it. I mean, it didn't make it everything like we're all legal and all that, but that by doing so really pushed that initiative forward. So now, not just here in Tennessee, but there's other states like Texas, Arizona, Mississippi, like there's other ones that are doing it, and we're going to be all essentially like synced together, the clinical trials, so that the way the clinical trials go, it starts like small to hopefully show like this is like with a small amount of people, like let's say 10 to 20, like, okay, great. That allows us to go bigger, right? So now 50 person, 50 subjects to several hundred. So one day it finally gets so big that, and hopefully the science shows it, like it's worth it. Let's do this and let's improve it. But now we're able with all these different states to kind of coordinate them together to hopefully kick that can down the road faster. So super passionate about that, and super honored to be an ambassador for Americans for Ibogaine, because it's really, that organization, I believe, aligns with me of just trying to impact human suffering. Right. And I do, because the thing is with this addiction of just, one might say here in Tennessee, well, it's only, there's 8 people. Yeah, I don't know. It's not that big a deal. Well, that's daily. And not just that, but like one person, if anybody's experienced addiction in their family, there's a ripple effect that goes all the way across, whether it's the children or the parents or the friends. And that's 8 people. And then there's like, not only all those people are affecting other people. So it just, I'm just really hopeful. We still don't know. That's what the science is coming, but I'm fingers crossed. I hope it has the potential that I think it does.
That's amazing. And, that's 8 people, I believe you said, that die of overdose or
Yeah.
something, right? So what about all the other people that just suffer in silence, or
Yes.
they're not showing up as a statistic, but
Yes.
yeah, it's rippling through communities and families and generations, creating generational trauma.
Great point. Generational trauma is huge, man. Yeah, with that. Sad.
Yeah. So wrapping up, what's next for you? What are you doing now? And what's kind of the next hill that you're climbing?
Yeah. Let's see here. On a micro level, just keep working with my clients as a therapist, just trying to help them impact their suffering. Involved with, one more wave. We just keep pushing that. I know the guys just got back from Hawaiian Adaptive Surf Competition, so
Nice.
supporting them, fundraising, all of that. And then also with Americans for Ibogaine, just supporting there's some speaking opportunities, some legislative opportunities. And then, so that's it, like on a macro level.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Amazing. And how are you feeling these days? How do you personally feel? Like,
Yeah, it's good. Like
yeah,
I struggle with, I think a lot of us
yeah,
from our backgrounds, of like trying to spin too many plates at once. And
yeah,
I feel
yeah,
like the universe kind of like, teaches me that lesson again and again. So I'm doing well. However, I just need to keep my finger on the pulse of how much I take on, because it's like this passion I have, to try to impact suffering, or at some points it creates my own suffering
yeah,
because I'm
yeah,
just like burning the wick at both ends. So,
yeah. Right.
long answer your simple question. I'm good, and thank you for asking. But it's a daily process of just checking in on myself, going to my own therapy, my own daily meditation practice, breath work practices, those types of things, and trying to do purposeful, meaningful work. That's at least the equation that works for me.
Yeah. No. And last thing I want to say on this is that, like, and you make a really good point about this, is that the work doesn't stop. I
Mm-mm.
think people, especially in the alternative wellness space, like, it's easy to say, like, hey, these treatments are shit, these treatments are better, go do these treatments. But it doesn't, I think there's a false belief sometimes that, like, then you're fixed. And
Yeah.
in my experience, it's been like the work doesn't stop. It's building a toolkit that is more sustainable than some of these other tools, and it's a lifelong pursuit of kind of staying up
Yes.
on all of those things.
Totally, dude. You nailed it.
Yeah,
You absolutely nailed it. And I'm so glad you did, because especially in the plant medicine space, oftentimes people think that like, oh, I'm struggling, I'm just gonna like the magic pill and I'm gonna be good. And the problem is with that is that oftentimes, especially veterans, when they do that, there's this honeymoon phase, if people don't know, like a month after, where everything's feeling good. And I believe because the brain chemistry is recalibrating.
hmm,
However, where it gets tricky is if you're not doing that integration work or working with somebody, helping you put the pieces back together, cleaning up your behaviors, right? Where you're not drinking a 12-pack a day, you're not having toxic relationships, you're cutting out some stress, you're implementing, mindfulness practices, exercise, diet, all those things. If you're not doing that, what I believe, the guys I know who have done treatments and then died by suicide after the veterans, oftentimes it's because they fall right back into their old
yeah,
habits, and
yeah,
then they turn around and they see all their buddies that are getting better from it, and then they think to themselves, well, this was my last shot. Like, if I can't do it, then I'm messed up. But the reality is they're so in it that they didn't realize, no, it's, you got to just change those behaviors. To your point, it is a daily thing. Just keep going, keep grinding, and but with positive stuff, like, not,
yeah,
like like you deserve it. You deserve to live a happy, healthy life. But it goes through effort. It's the same thing. If you put in the same amount of effort you did to be the best at whatever it is you do, whether it was a SEAL Team 6 operator, whether it was like, I don't know, an artist, that, whatever it is, it's like that same effort needs to be put into your own mental health. And especially if somebody's been really touched the bottom of suicidal ideation, like the bottom of that deep end, and you can get back down there. It's like that is a check engine light saying, like, you need to tackle your mental health like you would, a world-class performer in anything. It takes that type of motivation and effort.
yeah. Wow. Well, Alex, thank you for your service. Thank you for coming
Thank you
on
for
the
yours.
pod. Yeah, and thank you for just your continued dedication to ending suffering. I think that's a really beautiful thing, and a good life vocation. So Thank you again for coming on the show. And this has been the Mind Body Mushroom. Alex West. Do you have anything you want to plug at the end? Social media, website, anything like that?
Yeah, sure. Check out One More Waves handle. It's going to be the number one M Wave Surf. That's our new handle. You can check out my Instagram handle at AlexWest_Coast, Alex West Coast. And then that's it. Oh, yeah. And then check out Americans for Ibogaine. Just type it in the search and just give them a follow. And I think you'll be excited to see what we have going on. And thank you, Jordan, for the opportunity, by the way.
Oh, bro, thanks for your time. I appreciate it, man. All right. Catch you in the next one.